Alright, what's up YouTube? Alright, so today I'm going to show you guys how to get started with connecting your Claude Code to LM Studio to run open models, which is pretty cool. Let's hop over and check that out. All right, so we should be seeing my screen here. Now over here on the right hand side of the screen, we've got our instructions, a markdown file, which I'll be including in a GitHub repository that I will stick in the information down below here. So first thing we're going to do is get LM Studio up and running. So I've already downloaded the AppImage. You don't have to use an AppImage. I'm on Linux and Fedora, so I'm not using AppImages. Are just nice because they're packaged. They're containerized, if you will. All the dependencies are baked in if you're not familiar with AppImages. And you don't have to run them as root. You can run them as a normal user. So they're pretty cool. So I've got this AppImage downloaded here. LM Studio 461. I'm using this on a Spark DGX, so it's ARM 64. A lot of people that do not have a Spark will be using an x86. So go ahead and download that. When you do that, go ahead and set the executable bit on the file. Or what I have here is all LM Studio app images. They update these things so regularly. You'll see a lot of this AI community. It's like boom, boom, boom. It's changing so much every day. So I just set them all. You know, I might be trying out different versions. LM Studio is very, very cool. It is proprietary. It uses a lot of open things, open models, maybe some open proxies, but it itself is proprietary. So I'm going to show you guys how to do this also with Ollama and VLLM, but LM Studio makes this super easy and it kind of works out of the box. So that's what we're going to start with. So the first thing I'm going to do is run this thing. And I've got an alias set up. I'm logged into my Spark, my DGX Spark, and I'm going to start this thing up. Hopefully it just cranks up and goes. There we go. All this stuff I've got display to and all this junk, you probably won't need that unless you're running a similar setup as me where I'm working on my main workstation and my Spark is on the network. And I'm using display 1 for input leap so I can software KVM. So I did have to hackery this thing just a little bit. You probably won't have to do that, but here we go. We've got LM Studio, and I'm going to maximize this thing so that we can kind of see what we're doing here. So over here on the left-hand side, in our kind of left side panel here, we see like the main one where you have the chats, this purple guy. The next one is the developer console. This is where we're going to be working with right now. Just to give you guys an overview of the other ones, we've got the My Models section, which is models that you've already downloaded, and you can see I've pinned a few of the ones that I have been trying out or you know, like or have tested, and then some other ones I maybe have or haven't tested yet. And then this final one here is model search. So the first thing you're going to do here, and my instructions assume that you already have a model downloaded, But the first thing you're going to want to do is come in here and download a model. And I'll zoom in on this so we can see what we're talking about here. But Qwen3.5 35B A3B, which is vision, tools, and reasoning. Supports all three. Now you can turn off the reasoning, which makes it quite a bit faster. But yeah, so some other popular ones. I like how they have these staff picks up here. Like, hey, try these. These are cool. And some models are designed for different things. But this 35B means it's got 35 billion total parameters. A3B means it's using a mixture of experts. And it only activates 3 billion parameters at a time. So it's very fast. You'll see here a lot of times what we're using today is like Q4KM, which means it's quantized to 4 bits, which drastically reduces the size, which makes it available to consumers in a lot of cases. Or, you know, it decreases the size, and then the combination of the mixture of experts actually makes inference faster. So both of those things combined are game changers for us. Okay, so I've got this one downloaded. We're going to go ahead and start it up. So I'm going to go back over to the developer. You can also use Control 2 if you're keyboard oriented. I'm going to point and click my way through this thing here. So we're going to click on Developer, Local Server, which should be the automatic. You can see right now my status is running. And where it's reachable at over the network. We're going to plug this into our Claude Code settings later. So take note of this. In the server settings, what we want to look for here, the server port default 1234 is fine. We're not going to require any authentication, but we are going to check this one. Serve on the local network. So if I don't have this selected, you're going to see a 127 loopback address. Now anything 127, anything in these last 3 octets here is all loopback. We don't want a loopback unless you're running this on your local machine. And maybe you've got something like a Strix Halo or you're on your actual Spark. You know, that's fine. We're going to be serving this over the network. So I want to serve on local network, and it kind of gives me a little warning here. You know, just be careful with this. I don't know what you have to really be careful about, but we get some cool things in LM Studio that I really like. We get the server settings, and then we get developer logs. So I'm gonna delete all these developer logs, and we're just gonna restart it. And it's like, hey, we get some cool things. We can see right here we've got some OpenAI compatible endpoints that fire up right away. Now LM Studio supports the OpenAI compatible endpoints and also the Anthropic, which is what we're going to use for Claude Code. So the next thing we're going to do is load a model. So I'm going to load up Qwen3.5 35B. Now I haven't really tested this one yet that much, so we are going to load that up. And now the most important thing when you're loading these models is the context window. So if you select anything really, I would say 16K is like the minimum for Claude Code specifically. Now you might be able to get away with that in some other you know, agentic coding harnesses to leverage this backend open LLM. But you know, realistically, 32 should be kind of your target. If you're tight on you know, space, you might be able to get away with 16. 32 should work. I'm going to just go ahead and crank it all the way up. We've got tons of unified memory shared between the GPU and the CPU here. So RAM, GPU, all that good stuff. So This is a very light model, only going to take 33 gig is what it's telling me here. We're capable to run much bigger ones, but this might be more applicable to people who might be running something like a 5090 or something like that. So we're going to use this model, and over here, once we've got that loaded very quick. We could test it with a curl command and throw these into a CLI and see if we're getting a response. The other thing I want you to notice over here on the right-hand panel, and we can, show and hide that one with this little button up here. It gives us some pretty good information about our model, so how much size on disk, and then we saw it was taking 33, so about 11 gigs of that memory, that RAM or VRAM, is used for our context window. All right, so that's pretty cool. Now if you come over here to load, you're going to be able to see our context limit. You're also going to be able to see some other settings in here, and I don't really mess with these too much, but you can come in here and play around with some of these settings. Different models I found have different settings in here where you can turn off certain things. This is going to be our concurrency setting, so if we want to support more concurrency, 4 is usually a pretty good number. I think unless you're using sub-agents with Claude Code, it really only uses maybe 2 or 3 tops. So 4 is going to be plenty for what we're doing here. If we go over to Inference, this is the one I'm going to check off. Enable thinking. So I'm just going to say, hey, I don't really want to think. I want to turn this more into an instruct model. So I'm going to disable that. Temperature, I could turn this thing down for better tool calls, typically for tool calling models. I'm going to leave it the default 6 just to see how this thing kind of works. Context overflow. Now this is pretty cool that LM Studio does in comparison to something like VLLM, which it doesn't have any kind of context overflow management. A lot of times, a lot of them will just truncate, like a first in, first out kind of thing, so if you overflow, it just drops the front end, which might drop like your system prompt or your Claude MD or something like that. Truncate in the middle is going to be kind of the sweet spot a lot of times, where it keeps your Claude MD file and all of your system prompt and all that good stuff, and then the last few messages, and then kind of drop what's in the middle. I like that we can stop at limit. So this is what VLLM does. It once you hit that context limit, that next token over, just you've hit you're so X amount of tokens over. We're not going to process this request. Rolling window, that's going to get rid of some of the earlier messages, keep the most recent stuff, but that can also drop things like your Claude MD file like we mentioned. So this is pretty cool, and it looks like they've got maybe like a little built-in proxy, and we're going to build one of those when we test some of these other backends that are open source. So we're going to do truncate middle, that's cool. We can do things like structured output if we want to structure it in a certain way. If we've got a certain agentic coding harness, I'm not going to do that. And then speculative decoding. This doesn't support MTP speculative decoding right now, so this is draft speculative decoding, where it uses 2 models instead of 1. A smaller model and a bigger model to go ahead. Your bigger model, instead of processing the prompt and generating its own tokens, it uses the smaller model to do that, and then the bigger model just verifies. We're not going to play around with that right now. That's a little bit more advanced. So these are just some of the settings that you can modify in the inference section, which is really cool. I like that. we're not going to do any of that. Oh, reload needed. Yeah, let's just reload. Why not? I disabled thinking. That might be what that is there. So, all right. We've reloaded that model. Now we're good to go for the next step. So the next step, yeah, we've done this, we've done that, check, check, check. Our next step is we are going to want to create a Claude config here. I save this in the Claude directory, which is where the normal settings JSON lives. I'm going to name mine LM Studio JSON, and basically the Anthropic base URL, we're going to plug in what our server, our LM server, said it was listening on. So my Spark is at 192.168.681 using that default port of 123. This auth token, that was one of our settings within LM Studio. We disabled authentication. So basically this could be anything. This doesn't matter. But we just set it here. This is going to give us a timeout. This is pretty crazy timeout of like 50 minutes or something. Claude non-essential traffic. So this would be like your telemetry and stuff like that. We don't need any of that. We're using an open model. We don't need to send anything actually to Anthropic about how we're using this. Attribution header. So this is going to be important for things like pre-cache processing. So they might, set a certain header in there, and that throws off your cached prefill. So it's got to process all the tokens instead of what it saw before, and only process new tokens, which is pretty big advantage for speed. And then default model. So if we've only got one model loaded in LM Studio, it's going to go to this default model. So this is going to make it easy to switch out models without going and modifying this file every time we do that. So this is going to give us some flexibility. And then this is how we're going to launch it. Claude, and then the settings flag, and then we're going to pass in these settings right here. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to move myself over here. Well, before I do that, I'm going to pop over to the right side and zoom out a little bit. So you can see over here, I'll zoom in on this. Our DGX Spark is using 38. Now, I think like 7 of this is our system itself, the normal RAM utilization for things like the desktop environment, the GNOME desktop environment, stuff like that. So I think maybe 31 or 32 of this is the actual model itself. So we're going to be able to see what is going on there. Zoom out on that a little bit so we can see that. Now, in the middle here, we've got a ghosty terminal session with our Claude settings, and we're pointing it at that settings JSON file. So let's run this, and I'm going to zoom in. Pow. All right, now it's saying I'm in home Tyrell. Do I trust this folder? Sure. Now I am in Claude Code, and I can just say, hi. And we should see, okay, our GPU utilization cranking up on the DGX Spark. Now, the first message that you send usually takes a little bit longer. We can see that one took a little while to probably populate some of those KV caches and stuff like that on our DGX Spark. So we're still at 38.6 gigs. That one took a minute there, but yeah. So we've got our model up and running. We've got Claude Code connected. Now, I probably shouldn't be running this in my home directory, but all I've said so far was hi. And notice that we've got 17,000 tokens in use. Now, if I run context, I can kind of see what is taking up all those tokens by default. And we see default model here is what we passed into the configuration file. And that's taking a minute too. All right, see our all right, so system prompt, 3K token. System tools, 15K tokens. Skills, I think I have a couple of, I've got one skill here in my home directory, not project specific. Messages, 109 tokens. All I've said so far was hi. Free space, and then some context for reserved for the auto compact buffer. Cool. So I'm going to actually restart this in a different directory, so maybe we can see it in action and verify that it actually works. Right. I'm going to exit out of this. I'm going to cd to projects. I'm going to list some of my projects here. I'm going to cd into test. Why not? ls. All right, so I've got a index file in here that is 0 bytes. I've got a Git repository, and let's see what's in Claude so far. Work trees. So I'm going to remove this Claude directory. There we go. Clear. Now I'm going to restart our Claude with the settings. There we go. All right. So now I've got a blank index file. No settings so far. And I'm going to drop into plan mode, and I'm going to say, hey, I want to create a landing page for an algo trading company. Make it sleek and modern. Yeah. All right. Include SVG animations, mesh gradient, background, and heading text. And what else can we do? That's pretty good. Tell it to crank on that. So we'll plan first and then execute. Pop back over to the middle here. So we can see our tokens are cranking away over here. We're up to 37,000 tokens so far. Yeah, it's responding. Maybe we should see what our GPU looks like during this, huh? Okay, so pop back over here to the right side. We are at 39, creeping up to 40 gigs on our GPU. And we're using a consistent 90% GPU utilization. Now back over here, we're thinking. Thought I turned thinking. Oh, skill. It automatically pulled in a skill. Hey, that's interesting. So I've got this designer skill I created specifically for creating front-end UIs. So maybe this might create something that looks halfway decent here. Let's see. All right, create a sleek, modern, yada, yada, yada. We're still in plan mode, so it should plan and then ask us if we want to accept that plan, just like it would do with the latest Frontier, Opus 4.6 or Sonnet 4.6 or Haiku or whatever your model you're using. And then once you accept that plan, it's going to move into auto accept edits and crank away. So let's see just how long this takes here. 2 minutes and counting. I'm curious, what coding agents are you guys using? I'm currently subscribed myself to Claude Code, Codex, and GitHub CLI. I use Gemini a little bit, some of the free stuff. I don't subscribe to them yet, but one of the reasons I got my DGX Spark was because I wanted to do some more stuff like a low order rank and adaptation or whatever, do some training and you know, kind of modify these. Oh, we got an error here. And I also kept getting rate limited. So I would be like halfway through updating a project, and then, you know, you're in the zone, you're in flow state, and then boom, you're like, I gotta wait a couple hours, or I gotta wait a few days. I've reached my weekly limit or my 5-hour limit, and it just totally hoses your progress. And then you switch to another mod. So I might be halfway through editing with Claude, and then I got to switch to Codex, who's got to pick up on the edits and then keep the ball rolling. And it works. It does work, but it's not clean. And you're switching back and forth. And one thing I do like about Copilot CLI is it's you get one big monthly token allowance, and they don't rate limit you as much by the hour, but you don't get quite the same coding harnesses as you do with Codex and Claude. But you do get access to the backend models, so there's that, and it's only $10 a month versus 20 or 200. So it's a nice little fallback. I like to use it a lot for sysadmin tasks. All right, so file's not been for read it first before writing to it. Now we're in plan mode. We really shouldn't be YOLOing here. Now, while you can plug in any kind of model into the back end here, some models do work better than others. So I think in the docs they say if you're going to use a llama, Chat GPT OSS 20B or 120B, go ahead and allow it, but we're in plan mode. I don't know why you're trying to write already. I think a bigger model might be a little bit better right here. So yeah, I'll just say, okay. So it did move us into accept edits, but it didn't tell us, hey, do you want to accept this plan? So that's, yeah. I'm not really feeling that part of it, but I think the model I usually use is with the Qwen3.5 35B A3B model does actually follow the plan, and you can modify the plan. But yeah, okay. So it's writing this index here, straight YOLO. Which is a lot of us, what we do anyways, but. Alright, so I've created this sleek. So it took, like 5 minutes for that, which isn't too bad. We use 60,000 tokens. I'm going to tell it, I like these little suggestions, these tabs. So I'm going to tell it open this in a browser so we can see what this looks like. Okay, cool. Yeah, I trust you on that stuff. All right, open it up. Sure, don't ask again. Hey, this isn't too bad. Quantum flow. Get started, learn more. Features. Okay, I'm just going to scroll down and then I'm going to test these out. Yeah, that's not too bad. Kind of did what we wanted. Not a whole lot of animation here, but very good. All right, that's very simple. But it works. Worked. First shot right out of the box. Bang. All right, so that is the video for today. I hope you guys got something useful out of this. And I will catch you guys next time. Alright guys, so one thing I forgot to do that I'm going to show you now within the LM Studio developer console here is when I'm requesting anything via the Claude Code CLI, we're going to be able to see these things process in real time. I'm going to delete the developer logs, and I'm going to test out this vision processing component, which is pretty cool in my opinion. A lot of times I don't use screenshots when I'm using open models on the back end, but since this supports it, we are going to test that out. So I'm going to go back over to our page, and I'm going to take a screenshot. And I'm gonna just, yeah, whatever. Yeah, that's cool. All right, now I'm going to pop back over and I'm gonna paste this into our coding model there. Okay, so it did paste the image in. Ooh, let me, am I off to the right? Yes, I am off to the right, cool. So I'm gonna say, make this more like cyberpunk-ish. Neon cyberpunk retro. Why not? Punk retro. All right, so I'm going to pop off this request. Now, what we could see over here in the LM Studio portion of this, and it's prompt processing right now. My tiling won't let me, my mouses are all over the place. Oh no! All right, so while that's cranking array, I'll go over here. So it was prompt processing, and now we can see it's in the generation phase. And we can see that kind of in the logs there as well. And we can turn up the verbosity of these loggings, which also makes LM Studio kind of unique and cool as well. We can see what the requests look like, raw JSON coming in, what the response was, all that stuff. And we can see how many concurrent connections we have. Right now we just have the one that's generating, and we can see the tokens generate in real time, which is also a pretty cool feature within LM Studio. So wanted to point that one out. Let's see what, and I'm going to switch out the layout here. Geez, it really messed my layout here, but whatever. Let's minimize. Ooh, we're up to 40 here. 40 gigs, we've got the 91% GPU utilization. All right, so we want more neon cyberpunk retro aesthetic. Yeah. Cranking away, synthwave, yada, yada, yada. Don't really care. Generating, we're generating what, 5,000 tokens. So I do like that we were able to pass in this image, which is a lot more like you get out of the Frontier models. Up until this point, I've been using more like instruct and coding models, which haven't really supported images. So it'll be curious what we get here out of this a little bit lighter model. And I'm also curious, like the response time. So that first one shot took 5 minutes, roughly. I'm wondering if this will be right around that same mark. I'd also be curious as to what rate we're getting here. I wonder if we could drop into a local chat and just say new. What's up with your tokens per second? All right, we're generating that. If we come back over here, we should see 2 concurrent requests to this model. All right, let's pop back over to our chat, and we can see we're only getting like 29 tokens per second here. That's not great. That is not great for a 35B A3B. So we're going to see when we switch over to something like VLLM on the DGX Spark anyways, it's optimized. We should be crushing this for a model this size. I think the 80B A3B model, I'm getting like 62 or 64 tokens per second, so double what we're getting here. But this is, LM Studio is very useful for quickly finding models, loading them, starting a server, connecting it. So, you know, kudos to them for that. So this one took 4 minutes and 33 seconds, slightly faster than our last one. I'm gonna get, okay, open it. We're up to 112K tokens. All right, hey, that actually looks pretty good. What do you guys think? So we were able to process an image, revise. It definitely looking a little bit more neon, cyberpunky, retro than it was before. I kind of actually kind of digging this one. All right, now that's gonna do it for this video. Catch you guys on the flip side.